Welcome. I'm Denise McCann, and I'm here with Andy Whiting with Better Trucks. And we're going to talk about the future of delivery networks, how technology and ingenuity are reshaping the middle and final miles. So, we've seen over the last couple of years this rise in point to point delivery for e commerce. Consumers now expect to know proactively with push alerts where their item is every step of the way. But with this growing trend in creating a seamless experience for shoppers, we can all agree there's still a lot of room for improvement. Talk to us a little bit about your approach to middle mile efficiency and why you chose to place your focus here.
Sure. So when you think about what makes last mile efficient is aggregation. And historically, point-to-point delivery is a stinker, right? One package, one driver, that's not going to make anybody any money. And I think if you look at the growth over the last few years, it's all been these big solutions about getting demand, but realistically, that point-to-point, it's just a loser. Through aggregation in the middle mile, being able to direct and either zone skip into a region or do deconsolidations and use local market delivery partners, harnessing that technology to make that happen, that's what wins, right? When you think about the US retail networks have been built around the parcel networks, the big players. But realistically, retailers all live, they operate, their stores are in the final mile, their malls are in the final mile, and being able to have a consolidation or deconsolidation point that you can aggregate, that's what wins. So it's point to point, no good. Aggregation is what makes this efficient for everyone.
Yes, I've actually seen that. What might an e-commerce business owner who's thinking of adding carriers this year consider when it comes to their overall costs to create a strong last mile delivery network? And has anything changed in the last 12 months?
Well, I think number one is there's large carriers out there that do a great job. But at the same time, pricing structure, if you're a smaller retailer, it's tough. As many have learned from going through Amazon and Fulfilled by Amazon, there's a painful process in there, whether it's fulfillment or whether it's the transportation offerings. So the opportunity and the needs for an alternative network where it is technology linking together carriers that not only have the assets, but they also have the connectivity on the technology side of it. That's what we're seeing. And we've seen the growth of that in the last 12 months. As I mentioned before, a year, 2 years ago, it was all about, hey, these new carriers coming out of here and they're raising a ton of money and they're getting killed on pricing. Now everyone's starting to think about that 2.0 version, which is, okay, how can we do middle mile sorts? How can we do those consolidations? And the idea is smaller carriers have had a hard time competing on larger scales because it's very expensive and timely, and just from a time perspective for a retailer to build an integration with all of these carriers that are out there. But if you can build an integration with, let's say, a middle mile provider, which is part of what we do, it allows them to tap into our network. So in other words, at Fillogic, we onboard capacity, we onboard demand. We manage the relationship. And so we work with our carrier partners and saying, hey, where are you growing to? Great. How can we basically pass our demand through you? And it takes this collaborative approach where we're able to grow together and create, kind of what we're calling an alternative network. And Andy and I have been talking about that for a while, and it's good to be actually doing those things now.
So this is another question, kind of dovetails into what you're saying. Small businesses, besides using you or finding you in the chaff of a million carriers that have been exposed in the last 12 months, what else can they do for middle and last mile?
Well, I think there's lots of traditional 3PLs that offer some solution to that, but unfortunately, the onboarding process takes a long time. Because when you think about traditional 3PLs, they have to optimize their asset, right? It's not just, hey, I can give you transportation, but it's, if I'm going to onboard you, you're going to use my infrastructure. There's time, there's effort, there's a lot that goes into it. Some are better than others. And in many cases, I definitely think we're at the beginning of this. We're about adding capacity. And, I think a lot of the feedback that we have gotten is, well, okay, COVID is gone, things have changed. I'm like, right, but consumer behavior hasn't. So if the customer is shopping online and they're shopping in stores, they really don't care. They still want the expectation of delivery. They still want the expectation of returns. And so the networks that were heavily, impacted over the last couple of years, they still need to change and they still need to modify. And all the work is being done in the final mile, but final mile needs to be made more cost effective. And that's, I think, the major change that everybody's had the aha moment, especially on the VC world. They've all come to the point of, if you can't show aggregation, if you can't show good unit economics because you're able to have multiple partners, once again, going back to that point to point, it's a stinker. The feedback that we get sometimes is, oh, you're final mile. I'm like, we're not final mile. We make it efficient, right? The idea is that we're able to work with partners and provide them good demand that helps them build their networks, because we're taking that little tiny pipe and making it a great big pipe. And
yes, I'll add something there, Bill, about operational considerations. As large shippers, small shippers, to think about adding multiple carriers, there are little legitimate physical considerations that they have. It might be dock doors, it might be placement of their warehouses, and so any way that you can kind of spread that coverage out by adding a single carrier that can provide service at a greater kind of coverage area is very valuable. We see that all the time, trying to help play well with partners. We help with zone skipping as well, where we will take capacity for other carriers, and move it through our network for our customers, because we know that's a way that they can use our service a little bit more efficiently. But when I think about like with Fillogic and what you guys do, I think it's very valuable to kind of unlock one integration to Fillogic, or one integration into that into your machine, kind of unlocks many other carriers, which gives them kind of the economies of scale, where when they're thinking about the consideration of like, maybe I can only add, I'm already using FedEx and I'm already using another, other regional, I only have room to add one more dock out of this facility. I can't add 10 more carriers, right? Even though that they could provide significant value. So I think that's something that we see often as well.
What are some of the unforeseen costs? Kind of a loaded question. Your clients at Fillogic have run into, for instance, I'm curious about return processing or other headaches that have come either after or before that initial parcel journey.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is, in 2 years ago, we got a lot of this feedback. We coin ourselves as the premier platform for local market logistics, but we're an end-to-end supply chain solution, right? So it's not just inbound e-commerce fulfillment, store-based fulfillment, but it's returns. It's our delivery marketplace, of which Better Trucks is a part of it. We're providing all of that. So one of the things then, when we onboard customers, they come to us, let's say, for one thing. And then because we've already built integrations, there's the ability to add additional solutions, things that we are doing for other customers that we can configure to match the need of the merchant. But so much of it is really based on what we know during the contract negotiation and what actually happens during implementation.
That's like that is an age-old axiom for sure. Ooh. Andy, what for you, what are some of the unforeseen costs that you run into?
Oh boy, are there many? Yeah, that's Bill kind of touched on it, just to kind of hammer that point home. Is during the discovery process or the onboarding process, the reality doesn't always match up to kind of what was sold. And I think it's just transparency in that, being as transparent as possible during the sales process with your customers and during the discovery process. What we talk about is always, we don't have a magic carpet. We're trying to solve the same problem as you are, which is to get things from point A to point B as cheaply and as fast as possible. The more information you as a customer share with us, the better we're going to come up with a solution. And, by hiding details or volume or, obfuscating these things, it makes it more difficult for us to do our job. So, when we think about costs, obviously, technical integration costs always are something we keep in mind, but also, just the operational nature of picking goods up at warehouses and but again, it's just the relationship during the process, onboarding process, working very closely with the customer, again, reiterating that we're all trying to solve the same problem. And by doing so, just, becoming an ally, and that usually goes a really long way. So, but yeah, there are definitely a lot of costs that, kind of come up here and there. So.
Like I've gotten to the point, and Carol Tomei from UPS has this great quote, like, more business is not always good business. And it's great
Absolutely.
to be able to take that, that business, and we were talking before about sort of some of the goat rodeo issues. And I think it's our process that, like, for example, Fillogic, we put people through a process now to gain some level of requirements. Because when you're in the built world, there are walls. You can't have things sitting in the parking lot, right? And that jacks up. And when you have multiple customers in multiple buildings, but it can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Bill, we're both playing in this space where it's, truly the digital meeting the physical world, right? So there are real constraints that we have to worry about. Again, that's where it's like, look, we can't bend physics here. We're solving a problem, and so to work with customers. And I've just found that, being transparent in the sales process, being transparent in the onboarding, and then obviously, picking up the phone when things go wrong, or being proactive, goes an incredibly long way.
So Fillogic has a unique approach to utilizing unused mall space as distribution centers. How did you choose this approach, and how has it served you?
Well, so I've been in the retail logistics technology business for over 30 years. And in those 30 years, I realized that physical retail was being poorly served by logistics. And when you look at a shopping mall, there's 150 retailers in those particular buildings, and they all have major logistics problems. So when you think about physical retail, it's not dead, it's in transformation. So when you look at 75% of retail sales, over 75% are still coming from a physical retail location, but the logistics infrastructure is not up to speed. So we look at ourselves as a logistics company, but we're about value creation, right? By us providing the logistics infrastructure and technology and operations to help those retailers in those mall locations, we can make them more efficient. So when we say we take underutilized space, it is truly truck tunnels, storage locations, elbow joints, fire hallways, you name it. As long as we can run our data in there, we're big believers that the physical retail space should be for the retailers, because if that mall is doing well, that physical retail and that logistics process is going to need to be managed by someone. And the idea is we're an aggregator, but we're agnostic, right? B2B agnostic logistics infrastructure. Mall owner, retailer, carrier agnostic. We're all about the network. And I'll finish it up. When you think about it, as I mentioned before, the retail networks were built off of the parcel networks historically in the US. But realistically, everybody lives around a shopping mall. And those are the best middle mile locations. I don't care what anybody says of how good their little building is. If you can do it out of a mall, those are the best transportation locations. And when you think about it, mall's not open 24 hours. There is nobody in those parking lots before 7 o'clock in the morning. If you gave everybody the fact that they can do pickups, early, that's kind of what we hit on, and felt that was, really where it needed to go. And it's been a little interesting, but it's growing rapidly.
Andy, let's have your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, we leverage, it's why we love the partnership with Fillogic, is we see the opportunity for, the Fillogic network to also be part of our network. So there's a lot of overlap. So, we look forward to the day where every Fillogic node is a node and also in our network.
Yeah.
And so either our packages feeding through the Fillogic network, or our packages or using those as sortation centers to ultimately deliver packages, our drivers picking up from those facilities, which is what we're doing in a couple of markets right now. And so again, like Bill said, we are firm believers in a flexible model that is, whether that is time of day of week, creative space, whatever it might be, there's a ton of value that can be unlocked, especially in this kind of modern economy where people are, looking for things quickly, inexpensively, and people want to work when they want to work, maybe not necessarily 9 to 5. So we see a lot of value in unlocking that underutilized space, and Bill is doing the same thing, which makes a perfect marriage.
What are some of the main points you look for here, and how does that sort of system work for the e-commerce businesses that use Fillogic? In short, what's the main benefit to e-commerce businesses?
Well, so number one, we're not a rate shopper, right? We're an aggregator. And so we go look for where we have gaps in zip code density and look to find the carriers to fill that, or go to our existing carrier partners and say, I've got demand coming in this. Can we work together to expand your network? So while we're working on the capacity side, all of our customers use the same network. So you have enterprise retailers, digitally native brands that get the benefit of the network. And as we continue to expand and add additional carriers, you're building additional network opportunities. Whereas, as Andy said, if he doesn't have to go out and lease a building for sorts, but I get business that I get for sorts and I push that demand into his network, we've now taken all the costs that are associated with logistics, which is industrial real estate, labor in weird places, carriers in wrong places, everything that's associated with that. And we're using, and look, I won't get too far on the ESG component to it, but the sustainability aspect of using existing infrastructure for another business model, it's a win-win. Now,
it is
it easy? No, it's a disaster. But I mean, nobody said it was easy. I mean, right?
Let me go off script a minute. How did you two start basically a relationship and recognize the economies of scale?
Vegas.
Yeah, Vegas. I think, is that where we met, Bill? It was in Vegas?
I don't know.
Really? At one of those conferences, conventions?
No, I mean, I think that I see, what Fillogic is doing. I think that they have great big brands working with them, taking an innovative approach. My whole, kind of vision for our business is to, there's the giant duopoly that we're trying to take down. And, it requires creative out of the box thinking. And I saw that in Fillogic, and that was kind of why we gravitated towards them. We have a lot of mutual customers and also mutual respect. So I think that I think it definitely works both ways. We help in a niche, a key component of their business. And obviously, as we continue to grow with them, they will serve a great, it's a very symbiotic relationship. So
the head of network operations at Fillogic, a guy named Pete Leap's been in the space for 35 years. He has such a wealth of knowledge of middle and final mile carriers, and he's continually looking for the next latest, greatest carriers. And I think about a year and a half ago, we met with Better Trucks. We're like, man, that's going to be great when we have enough volume to give them. And when we did, we're like, okay, now we have to onboard Better Trucks. So we'd met Andy and the team a while ago, and then we started talking yet again at RELA. But actually, what I like a lot about it is, we share an investor, Venture 53. Dan
there you
White
go.
and Pat Martin, big believers in us, and it's pretty funny. So I thought I knew that they invested in Better Trucks, but we had a kickoff meeting with Venture 53, and it was just Andy and I talking back and forth, yada, yada, yada. But Venture 53 looks at the alternative networks in the future of logistics, and that's where we operate. But we've known each other, but now it's like we built the integration, it's tested, it works, it's solid. Yeah, and now it's more of, okay, so we're partners, we're working on this. Now we're looking for expansion opportunities. He and I are talking about some things in the Midwest, the opportunity where he can say, I'm going to move into a different region. The way we work with shopping malls, I can actually go and say, if I've got Better Trucks demand in that building, that allows me to plant the flag, stand a building up, because we don't open buildings anymore unless there's demand. We just don't do it. It's just, we've got
cart horse.
Yeah,
right.
Which is good.
For a fast-growing retail business, what would you advise they do as a first step into gaining fulfillment capacity?
Well, I mean, zip code optimization is amazing on the last mile, because you're basically saying, Andy, this is the volume I'm going to push down to you. And if I don't give it to you, Andy's coming back to us and saying, just This is what you thought you were going to have. Then, and this is where the aggregation component works. That, you know, as we built integrations with Better Trucks, we want to make sure we had enough volume going to those SIPs that it was meaningful. And so as we add additional customers that we operate within our hub network, we also take into account to say, great, where are those customers? Because we also need to know if that we're going to put it in our delivery marketplace network. We have to make sure that the carriers have the capacity. So it's very much a give and take. Our network operations teams work with the carriers to figure that out. But it all starts with the brand or the retailer. And yeah, they can be 70% right. That's fine. But they got to take a shot.
What are you seeing from customers that are getting reverse logistics right?
So number one, it all starts with the purchase experience. If what you're showing people on your website doesn't match what you send them, it's coming back. If it takes too long to fulfill, it's coming back. If it's shipped wrong, it's coming back. So if you don't get the front end right, it's coming back. So when you look at general merchandise or predominantly apparel, which is most of what we do, you're looking at return rates anywhere from 20% to 50%. Now, yes, returns is painful. I spent most of my life in off-price, so I know all about that, you know, gaylords of stuff showing up.
Oh, geez, no, nightmare, right.
But the thing is that unfortunately, today's technology infrastructure, is supply chain technology, returns is a big gap. There are some interesting platforms that provide the reverse logistics component, but they're full platforms. And in many cases, specifically the 3PLs, that's not a big enough part of their business to invest in it. Whereas for us, it's a core part of our business, right? The ability to receive something, have the integration to be able to initiate the fact that you received it, grade the shipment, and being able to define, hey, is that inventory able to go right back for sale? And then what do you have to do to it? You got to bag it, you got to tag it. And then I think the interesting thing is, what do you do with it? And so I think one of the great things in Fillogic's all about partnerships. So, you know, we work with people like Narvar. Narvar, we have an enterprise partnership, and, you know, to kind of work and build out that network. And, you know, we're talking with a bunch of things, and they're talking with some of our carrier partners. We're also working with folks that are dealing with previously loved merchandise to be able to resell that inventory. So I look at it as a revenue opportunity and a margin saver, because since most folks don't want to touch returns, the biggest problem is if you have a 25% return rate and you ship 100 units, there's 25 units that could take, if you're a good retailer, it's 15 days. If you're a digitally native brand that has problems, it takes 35 plus days to get that inventory available for sale. You might use a platform where you can do that return immediately when the customer gets their money, and then everybody takes a sigh of relief and says, I don't have to do anything. That's a margin killer. If you have full price inventory you can't make available for sale, that's a huge problem. So us being able to provide that infrastructure, and look, it's very much in its early stages, but we're building proprietary technology around that. And the same way we look at our delivery marketplace on as it goes outbound with partners like Better Trucks, we also look at the opportunity, because they're part of our network, inbound returns. If you go and pick up from something, you have the ability to pick it up and route it back as a return. You've just taken your freight cost way down. Right. When you get inventory available for sale, that's where this goes. We're not there yet, but it's just the beginning. Yeah, I mean, think of it. It's the age-old issue of deadhead miles. If you're sending somebody out to drop off a package, and if somebody says, "Hey, I got a package that you can pick it up," and we through the technology, we have the ability to scan it and pick it up and see if it's a valid return. That's really good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're working with a large outdoor retailer that has a large physical footprint, and they've done a lot of innovation around their store fulfillment. And not just in-store fulfillment for local markets, but they're leveraging us for in-store fulfillment kind of broadly across our network. And, you know, so it could come from a store in one market and end up in a customer's home in another market. But we are doing, you know, pickups at large retailers every day that are, you know, outbound, and we envision that as being a channel back to those facilities for the return. You know, so being at the customer's door and ending up back at the retailer almost every day gives us the ability to be a good path for that. But again, back to what Bill was saying, you it starts with that first, the customer experience on the purchase, and let's try to just reduce it at the beginning so we can all, kind of avoid some of those headaches.
What other trends are you seeing with Fillogic customers? And this is for Bill. So what other trends are you seeing? You seem to have a breadth and scope of this particular vertical, right?
Mhm.
Your industry in retail. What trends are you seeing besides reverse logistics? We've spoken of that.
Well, I just think the number one thing is through the pandemic, retailers today are all looking for alternatives, right?
Mhm.
Andy and I and our other partners and stuff, we're building alternative supply chain networks. But we also look at being very much close to existing retail infrastructure. Our whole goal is don't shut things down, don't change it dramatically. It's like we operate as nodes, and those additional options, whether it's fulfillment, reverse logistics, re-commerce, you name it. It's the optionality of what customers have always wanted. Now, most retailers are understanding, and as a lifelong retailer up until a couple of years ago, we try to dictate terms to the customers. You will buy like this. Customers got past that 15 years ago, right?
Yeah.
I'm where to buy my stuff, right? And I think because of that, and because of what happened with COVID, retailers are much more open to working with newer players, additional players. Because it used to be the long room battle of the wheels versus the walls, right? Are you transportation or are you operations? But nobody wanted to talk to tech, right? It was like, oh my God, the IT guys are going to come and blow it all up. The way I've always looked at it as being a former CIO myself is technology can empower the wheels and walls, right? Because really the logistics process is about moving something through a system. And every wall needs to be removed the same way customers don't look at channels. And so the way we were looking at the transportation and fulfillment and the reverse and the technology, putting that together, that's what's kind of the future. But we're looking at building a network to connect everyone. We're not saying we're going to shut this group out and we're not going to work with this folks. I mean, we'll work with anybody.
Very similar trends as Bill mentioned. All of our customers are looking for alternatives, which is great. And whether that's a purely a modern carrier like ourselves, or a combination of Fillogic for fulfillment and with us. I think though while they are looking for alternatives, there are, I go back to this like operational considerations that all of these retailers are making, right? They would love to use alternative methods and new kind of creative solutions, but they also have their own infrastructure that has been built and carved in stone over decades that you can't walk in there and say, hey, I've got this great new software and that's the only thing that matters, and you should use this. There's the reality of the physical world. And so, I think that's where we are very, we look and feel very like a traditional carrier, right? It is we integrate with tech-wise, like a modern, platform business, but at the same time, how we interact physically is very much similar to a FedEx or a UPS or one of the large players. So that is a very much an advantage for us, and we see that. So while the customers say they want alternatives, they aren't willing to change their processes usually, and you want to meet them where they operate. So that's definitely something we see.
That is perfect. As someone who worked for one of the duopoly companies for 26 years, it seems customers are afraid to change from either of those because they've been threatened that their incentives will be changed. They're unsure. So what I've seen with especially Andy in the last year and a half, 2 years, how long has it been? I myself have been educated in last mile, and my mind has been opened up to alternative, right? I think that's part of what this podcast can do is if we can at least to get not only future customers, other people in the industry thinking about this middle and last mile and how two different people are doing it that addresses the trends that are happening in this industry. I think it's well worth it.
And I'll add something to what Bill said earlier. He talked about, I think he used the words, full supply chain solution. that Fillogic is, and it's not just a middle mile network, right? It's not just a
Yeah.
last mile
Yes.
portion. It's not just a fulfillment portion. It's not. It is, and so we see very similarly. Like as soon as you start deconstructing the entire supply chain, there's a lot of different kind of niche players out there that kind of focus on one small piece.
Mhm.
But again, the overhead required for the customer to piece together all these different things, at some point they're just like, I don't have time for that. Like I
Right,
just
they're like uncle, yeah.
like, yeah, I'll just go do it the old way. I'm not worried about it. I know I need to do this. And so again, back to what we do is, we pick it up just like a large carrier, and we get it to the residence's door just like a large carrier. And what happens in between, as long as there's visibility and good quality service,
Right.
they don't care if it's via a Fillogic sort facility that we use or vice versa, right? And that's what the customers are. They want a good brand experience. They want a good tech integration experience. They want communication back to their customers, and they ultimately want the physical operational integration to be, consistent with what they've done in the past. If you can do all those things, then you got a solution that can win.
Well, gentlemen, it has been wonderful to spend this time with both of you, Bill, Andy.
Thank you, Denise.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.